Right, so nothing quite says I'm innocent like threatening the organisation seeking arrest warrants against you, but that very much appears to be what Benjamin Netanyahu has done on camera to International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Karim. But this is just one example of the screaming fallout coming from some politicians and spokespeople following the announcement that the ICC is pursuing arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 figures from the Hamas leadership on different separate charges. Nonetheless, the accusation is that the ICC is committing moral equivalence on this issue, and indeed if the charges were the same, there might be an argument for that. But there aren't, so there isn't. There are 2 separate cases here, one against Hamas leaders and one against Israel's. The ICC is literally doing its job, and, well, some in the world so wedded to Israel's existence that its conduct, even down to committing war crimes, gets excused, that now sanctions or worse are being threatened against the literal court over it. Nobody doing this should be taken seriously as world leaders, and actually they could be committing crimes and risking arrest warrants being issued to them too, by carrying on as they are.
Are you concerned about traveling in the wake of this arrest warrant?
No, I'm not concerned about traveling. I'm not concerned at all about our status. I think that the prosecutor should be concerned about his status because he's really turning the ICC into a pariah institution. People are just not going to take it seriously. They see it as a politicized thing. I hope that the judges don't confirm what he says, because that will make them into a kangaroo court.
Right, so that was Benjamin Netanyahu there, saying that he is not concerned at all about his own ability to travel, even though, should an arrest warrant be issued, he would be arrested, or should be arrested, if he lands in one of the 124 countries that are state parties to the Rome Statute, the foundation upon which the International Criminal Court is built upon, including this one. But he is worried about the Chief Prosecutor's ability to travel. He's very worried about his ability to go anywhere. Well, why would that be then? He's not in danger of being arrested for any war crimes. What are you trying to say then? What does he have to fear? What are you saying? Sounds rather threatening to me. Very pound shop mafia of you. It'd be a shame if you left The Hague, you might have an unfortunate accident kind of vibes. In another clip, he compared the potential prosecution of himself to prosecuting George Bush over 9/11 or FDR over World War II, emphasising an argument of moral equivalence here, because Hamas are being prosecuted as well as Israel. But it's a false equivalence because prosecution is being sought for them separately on separate charges. What the ICC has done is dare to do its actual job and fulfil its true remit, and done so despite pressure being put on them to stick to Africa and thugs like Putin and not prosecute Western allies. It's not a case of who does this guy Karim at the ICC think he is. It's who those refusing to acknowledge the truth of these potential prosecutions, the reasons for them, and those trying to excuse it that really need asking, who do you think you are? As much as Netanyahu is trying to excuse himself and threaten the ICC prosecutor, calling the ICC and Karim anti-Semitic, because of course he has, calling the charges on him as being the same as levying charges on the Jewish faith, comparing the two, the same weasel excuses Zionists always come out with, he's sadly very much not alone.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection. But let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that. We're going to always stand with Israel and the threats against its security.
So speaks a man who seems dead set on losing to Donald Trump in November if he carries on with this frankly insane narrative of denying what is obvious to every sane person on the planet by now. Genocide Joe Biden knows better than the ICC on what counts as genocide, because sure he does. The emperor is now completely naked. Selective application of international law, a complete denial of anything Israel ever does, no matter how much that death toll rises. Now the US are not signatories to the Rome Statute or the ICC as a result of that, so frankly they can butt out as far as what the ICC does. But being America, of course they won't. There is now talk of Biden's Democrats working on a bipartisan deal with the Republicans to levy sanctions against the ICC over this prosecution. How dare they carry out their remit? It's a bit of a head-scratcher, though. If they're not anything to do with the ICC, they're not signatories to the Rome Statute, what can they possibly issue sanctions over? Well, anyone who interacts with the ICC based in America and vice versa could have that blocked or impeded, from civil rights organisations to lawyers and investigators, which could carry civil or criminal penalties even for anyone who does. As for those working at the ICC elsewhere, any assets they might hold in the UK could be frozen and they or their families could be banned from travelling there. All in all, what the US can do is enforce, well, their own petulance, essentially, and in blocking an internationally recognised criminal court from discharging its duties, only serves to make itself look like a bigger global pariah than it already is right now. Then, of course, there's that whole Hague Invasion Act business the US has got. But good grief, can you imagine the US literally attacking the ICC, which is part of the UN, it should be noted? There's no spin or optics that could possibly save the US from political consequences for that, surely. And for what, when it all comes down to it? Saving Israel, putting Israel and its needs and wants, despite its conduct, before the well-being and political standing of the United States itself, effectively. Personally, I can't see things going that far, but also, just what is the limit of Biden's slavishness towards the apartheid state of Israel? Denial of genocide is just a sick joke at this point. Equally, however, the ICC needn't just take such threats as these on the chin, because it has options of recourse too, and the issuing of further arrest warrants over conduct such as this can't be ruled out either. And this brings us back to that Rome Statute, again, that the ICC is built on. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court is a vast document comprising 128 separate articles, the informal version of which still stretches to almost 90 pages. But the specific article within it that has some politicians, well, where they might be crossing the line, shall we call it, over the threats of sanctions for doing its job, threats against individual persons as Netanyahu appears to have done on camera, is Article 70, which covers offences against the administration of justice. Interference in the court's duty, in other words, and specifically within Article 70, it is Part 1D that applies here in my mind. Impeding, intimidating, or corruptly influencing an official of the court for the purpose of forcing or persuading the official not to perform or to perform improperly his or her duties. I call threats of sanction or against a person directly who works for the court intimidation or corrupt influence. I'd also suggest Part 1E could be relevant too. Retaliating against an official of the court on account of duties performed by that or another official. Certainly seems to apply to all the comments specifically against Karim. Now, the matter of jurisdiction again has to be demonstrated, but threats against the court directly surely must count. You would think they would, but that has to be proven apparently. That's Part 2 of Article 70, incidentally. But the maximum punishment that can be meted out by the ICC in relation to all of this is 5 years of imprisonment. It would be entertaining to see how Biden copes with being arrestable in 124 countries himself because he won't stop backing a genocidal apartheid state. But there we are. He is, by the look of it, asking for it right now. But out of legal concerns that don't involve you or your country, or you might find they soon do if and when you end up on the receiving end. It's not just US politicians or British politicians making fools of themselves for the sake of Israel, though. However, the US and UK both face national elections this year, and an intriguing possibility has been raised by Workers' Party of Britain MP George Galloway in a tweet that he posted. British politicians who have backed the actions of Netanyahu, now the subject of arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity, are themselves thereby complicit in those very crimes. They will soon be asking for your vote, hoping to make you complicit too. Now, I've spoken about the issue of complicity in a video I released yesterday, where a dossier on some 22 officials, British and Israeli, including it is alleged 5 government officials, MPs, which the evidence compiled by the ICJP, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, has handed to the police, Scotland Yard's War Crimes Division, to investigate possible charges of complicity in war crimes. Now, it's reasonable to assume this will all take a while to investigate, but with Sunak now having finally called the general election, is voting for a politician allegedly considered complicit in genocide, potentially being investigated for it, also making you complicit as a voter by voting for them? Now, voting for such a person unknowingly, because it's all confidential, who might be being investigated? I would suggest not. But if we find out they are under investigation prior to the election, or indeed during the course of the election campaign, as we now get underway with that, well, that could be very different. Now, obviously, our votes are anonymous, so we needn't surely fear prosecution for it as individuals. But vote that person in, vote them into power, potentially. Well, I suppose it could, in theory, invite sanctions on the country, therefore, on us, given we as a nation would have given them a mandate despite any such charges being levied against them. I'm not a lawyer, of course. I could be wrong. I also wonder how enforceable such a measure might be. Please do correct me if you know any different, but the fact an MP has actually raised this, implied it in a tweet, it does at least sound plausible, in which case. And besides anything else, to knowingly vote for an MP facing charges of complicity in war crimes, do you really want to vote for such a person, in which case? And if so, well, what does that say about you? I certainly wouldn't do so, nor any party they were part of, especially if said party didn't pull them from standing to begin with over it. Something else to think about, if nothing else. Fortunately, there are alternatives, and a Jewish former South African ANC MP by the name of Andrew Feinstein has created much excitement as he's announced his intention to stand against Keir Starmer himself in Holborn and St Pancras. Starmer himself having been caught on film supporting Israel's right to cut water and power from Gaza, despite denial since. Feinstein is Starmer's worst nightmare, everything that Starmer isn't. So find out all about his official campaign launch on this video recommendation here. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.